I suspect that President Trump will impose secondary sanctions. He doesn't like being thwarted. He made a great play of bringing Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. And if he doesn't get results, if he doesn't get a deal, he's going to be very disappointed. And in the past, that disappointment has led to decisive action. So I think the Russians probably need to sit up and take notice unless they're going to really brazen this out. I mean, their economy is shaky, there's no question. And if President Trump manages through his secondary sanctions to lower the oil price significantly, there's no way that Russia can continue the war the way they are at the moment and indeed continue their military buildup. India is getting its energy from Russia at a considerable knockdown price. It's not only using it for its own industry, it's also reselling it and making a profit on it. So understandably, the Americans aren't very happy with that. India has got to make a choice. At the moment, it's trying to sit on the fence. Does it run with the Eurasian autocrats or does it come towards the maritime democracies? Well, its grand strategy suggests with its rivalry with China that it instinctively should come to the maritime democracies. But the fact of life is, in sitting on the fence, it serves the purposes of Russia and China, and to a lesser extent in Iran as well, pretty well. And so I think what the Americans are saying is, look, you're making a killing out of this in terms of all this sort of cut price oil, particularly you're getting. That's got to come to an end because there are no penalties for Russia if they can continue to export to you like that. So with the prospect of these so-called secondary sanctions coming on, India has to be put in the crosshairs of any regime in the United States that wants to actually deal with that.
And we've also heard that the de facto Russia envoy Steve Witkoff will head to Russia in the coming days. Is there any sign that you can see that Russia wants a ceasefire ahead of Trump's recent deadline?
I don't think so. I think the Russians will do what they normally do. They try and brazen it out. They'll think, even at this late stage, they'll think that Trump is huffing and puffing. But they should take note of what happened during President Trump's last ultimatum to Iran. He said, within a certain time, I'm going to take some action. And the next thing he knew, there were B-2 bombers bombing the Iranian nuclear sites. I don't think we're going to get direct military action. But one of the big advantages that America has with President Trump is he's perceived to be unpredictable. And the last thing the Russians want is unpredictability. They need to be able to tell their own people a narrative. They need to keep projecting onto the world stage. They also need not to drag their partners in. China will not want to be dragged into an argument with the United States, given the market pressures that China is under right now. So China will be saying to Russia, play it long, and Russia will be trying to do that. I suspect that President Trump will impose secondary sanctions. He doesn't like being thwarted. He made a great play of bringing Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. And if he doesn't get results, if he doesn't get a deal, he's going to be very disappointed. And in the past, that disappointment has led to decisive action. So I think the Russians probably need to sit up and take notice unless they're going to really brazen this out. I mean, their economy is shaky, there's no question. And if President Trump manages through his secondary sanctions to lower the oil price significantly, there's no way that Russia can continue the war the way they are at the moment and indeed continue their military buildup. I mean, the concern from the American side, I think, is that in response, Russia will lash out, not at the United States, but at somebody else, which is important to the United States. Or indeed, they'll step up these grey zone hybrid activities against America's allies, particularly in Europe.
President Trump has announced that the US has repositioned 2 nuclear submarines in response to threats from the former Russian president, Dmitry Medvedev. How do you assess that move?
This is just a war of words, really. Whether you move a ballistic missile submarine one way or the other is irrelevant, to tell you the truth. When you've got missiles that can fire thousands of miles, moving them closer or further away, I'm afraid, doesn't mean anything. We all know that Dmitry Medvedev is the sort of incontinent sort of blowhard that the Russians use whenever they think they're in trouble. And I suspect this has been a threat that's been sort of cooked up in advance of President Trump taking any action with regard to secondary sanctions or indeed supplying Ukraine with more advanced weapons when President Trump's self-imposed sort of deadline runs out.
And previously, the West and especially the US had been more cautious in some of their nuclear language when they were, in getting into these sort of war of words. Is it the right time to kind of meet Russia's nuclear threat in a way like this on the world stage?
I think the Russians for some time have been sort of waving the nuclear saber around. It seemed, throughout the whole of the first year of the war in Ukraine, every time the free world sought to either support or indeed supply Ukraine with any sort of weapon, the nuclear saber came out. The trouble is that nobody believes you. You're not going to open a nuclear war with essentially fairly serious nuclear powers just for the sake of some sort of kilometers in Ukraine. It just doesn't work like that. We have to bear in mind that quite a lot of nuclear weapons, particularly at the top end, are regime threatening and indeed city killing weapons. These are not just high explosive rounds. And to sort of talk of them like that, I'm afraid, is irresponsible. What makes it a bit more serious in Russia's case is that they, along with China, India, Pakistan, Israel, all say that nuclear weapons are war-fighting weapons. They're not deterrent weapons. So you have to listen to what they say and try and interpret what is really being said. And as I said, I think if you bring the nuclear debate up so early in a conflict, they can't be serious. It's just an idle threat by a bully who's got them and thinks it's going to impress anybody at all. The fact of life is that they know very well the United States, United Kingdom, France has weapons of equal destructive power that can definitely do harm to Russia. Given its size, the only weapons that can do harm to Russia really in terms of regime threatening sort of moves are nuclear weapons. So it's almost self-defeating in some ways in bringing it out. They know there aren't going to be any consequences for them doing it. It impresses their own people, of course, that they're doing it and speaks to a different audience. But frankly, in military terms, it's next to nothing in terms of advantage.
And how does the Russian and US underwater capabilities stack up? Are the Russians going to be trying to track these submarines if they do think they're being moved closer than they were previously?
The United States and Russia are always tracking each other's ballistic missile submarines. It's been going on for some time now. Russian units are always looking for British ballistic missile submarines, as they are French and United States. During the Cold War, we used to keep track on as many of their ballistic missile submarines as we could. And I suspect we're on the case again with all sorts of technologies that we didn't have during the Cold War. If you can actually locate your opponent's ballistic missile submarines, it gives you a huge advantage. It actually threatens deterrence, of course, if one side thinks that its primary deterrence weapon is being detected. It's a constant battle, but it's difficult. Nuclear submarines are designed to be quiet nowadays. The latest Russian submarine, the Bory class, is not too bad in terms of noise quietening and acoustic hygiene. Not as good as American or British or indeed French, but they're pretty quiet. So you're going to have to use quite a lot of technology to find them. But they're not bad. The Russians have got 16 ballistic missile submarines, of which probably at any time 9 are operational. They include 8 of these Bory class, the latest, which have the Bulava intercontinental ballistic missile, and it's equivalent to Trident used by the Americans and the British. And it's all part of the game that is being played, pieces on the chessboard. But frankly, this idea that they're being moved closer to Russia is irrelevant when you've got basically intercontinental ballistic missiles that go into the exo-atmosphere and re-enter at a time and place of choice with multiple re-entry vehicles. It's irrelevant. It's pure rhetoric. And people who don't know about these things, I'm afraid, have got in their tiz about it.
Elsewhere, more activity that will probably be being watched by the West is this joint naval exercise that's going on between China and Russia. How closely should we be watching military cooperation between these two nations?
Oh, we need to be watching the cooperation that goes on between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea very closely indeed. We've seen progressively that Russia and China are doing military exercises at scale together. It's been going on for about 10 to 15 years now. And we've also seen indications that if one of them is involved in conflict with another country, and it's probably the United States that's in the frame, they're going to be helped by the other. We've seen it in the Pacific, we've seen it slightly in the Atlantic, but mostly in the Pacific. And we've seen joint deployments in other places as well. So more and more they're cooperating. And we have to accept that there is a semi-formal alliance between what I call the Eurasian autocrats, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. They're supplying each other with weapons. They're helping each other's supply chains in relation to military platforms and systems. We can expect them to cooperate in future to a greater or lesser extent. I mean, for example, in Ukraine right now, I mean, the Russians are making extensive use of Iranian Shahed drones. Most of the components that go into Russian missiles and other military systems come from China. And we know that North Korean troops have been on the ground, particularly up in Kursk Oblast, facing onto the Ukrainians in Sumy. So, yeah, I mean, we need to be worried because if Russia makes threats, if it gets itself too far in somewhere in a military conflict or indeed confrontation with the free world, you can expect China to be backing it up, first of all, in terms of logistics and support, but more importantly, in terms of weapon systems. But, you know, we need to be pretty clear about this. China supplies weapons, you know, high grade military weapons to the Houthis, for example, and to Iran. I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that essentially an insurgent group in Yemen would deploy ballistic and cruise missiles that are the envy probably of most nation states. So this is a new world, and this sort of semi-formal alliance that goes on between these authoritarian regimes, we have to see as a whole. You're not just confronting one of these, you're confronting all of them if you actually have to deal with them.